Yeah, obviously, I fundamentally disagree with your assessment, and I think it's very strange coming from a party where Hillary Clinton denied the election results for years. I mean, and said that her election was stolen from her. It's very weird for people to suddenly just not remember that. Sometimes it feels like the press
There
just
was no
sort of does like.
insurrection.
All right, folks, this is where it gets heated. Candace Owens and Don Lemon go head to head over election denial January 6th, and yes, trans indoctrination. You're about to see Owens drop bombshells, Lemon fire back, and the debate spiral into a clash of ideologies. Let's break this down together.
Around that. I mean, she eventually accepted.
Well, now you're accusing him of the insurrection. He has nothing to do with.
No, I said, but there was no insurrection around that. I didn't mention.
You can say.
Pause right there. Did you catch that? Owens just flipped the script on election denial, calling out political amnesia. Whether you agree or not, this pattern of selective memory is the real story here. Let's dive deeper.
Say that or not, but you just said he's an election denier. Okay, well, that would put Hillary Clinton in the exact same camp. And so it's very weird when there seems to be this sort of like Men in Black memory wipe where people pretend that suddenly Trump was the first person who questioned election results when that's been going on for a very long time in America and nobody cared about that.
Hear me out here. There's a difference between questioning an election, the results of an election, which happened with Al Gore and George Bush, than having almost every court in the land disagree with the assessment that the election was stolen. There's a difference between questioning an election than saying it was stolen. There's a difference between someone saying, I thought I should have won, and there were, I had all these wins that were, that were not at my back, than someone saying, you know what, the election was stolen, and that these people are heroes who actually desecrated the Capitol and beat up police officers, and a police officer ended up dying. That's a whole different thing. Those two are not equal.
So your old network even debunks the points that you just made. Obviously, the person that died that day was Ashley Babbitt, the only person who died on that day.
My old network does not debunk that.
They absolutely. I covered it on my show. Even
no,
CNN.
I work there. They do not. They do not.
Well, I have my computer. Do you want me to bring it up live? The CNN article where they debunked that Brian, who you're talking about, the police officer, died that day. He didn't.
I didn't
die
say
that
he died
day.
that day. I said
okay,
he
correct.
died.
Let me finish this. You said he died because you're trying to make people believe that it had something to do with what happened. He died of a stroke, a completely unrelated stroke days later. So that narrative that was quickly pushed out by CNN was then subsequently debunked. So the only person that died that day was Ashley Babbitt, and Ashley Babbitt was a Trump supporter. So only a Trump supporter died on that day. Regarding the insurrection narrative, there are questions that still have not been answered that seem implausible to me. I happened to be on that day in DC, 9 months pregnant, and it's just stunning to me that that whole summer DC burned and nobody cared, and then suddenly people are talking about an insurrection and nobody is asking the common sense question of why the FBI, while they can lock up grandmas for having walked into the Capitol, some of these charges are heinous, absolutely heinous. You see these people on camera just for simply walking in at the beckoning of security guards who allowed them in, were put into prison for a very long time. So I'll ask you the question: do you think it's a legitimate stance, or that it's legitimate that the FBI can't figure out who it was that dropped off pipe bombs the night before?
No, I don't think that any of what you said is very relevant, because the facts
It's not relevant.
for themselves.
Okay.
No, I don't think that it's relevant. I think talking about the FBI is really deflecting the attention from what really happened. A friend of mine, Michael Fanone, was a police officer who fought that day, who had a heart attack, who had a head injury, who was beaten with flagpoles and beaten with sticks by people who were in that crowd. The officer who died of a stroke, shortly after. It's surprise. I think that it would be tough to say that the stress that he suffered from that did not have something to do with it. Ashley Babbitt broke into the Capitol. It's awful that anybody died. Police officers, you see the tape on camera, telling everyone to stand down as she tried to enter. She was not complying. As people say, when police officers or officials tell you to do something, one should comply. And when she tried to break into the Capitol and defy the officers' commands, they did what they had to do, and she ended up dying. It's awful that it happened, but to say that she died, and I assume insinuate that it was because of some nefarious actions by the officers, I just think that is beyond the pale and does not actually fit a solid narrative of what actually happened.
Well, it's very dizzying. I'm actually dizzy right now because you know your entire perspective has been pro BLM, and your entire perspective on your network has been essentially that it was totally fine for the officers that were bludgeoned, the officers that were killed, the officers all throughout New York City in the BLM riots. You even had Yale graduates.
Can we keep the focus?
Please let me finish.
Can we keep, Candace,
I just allowed you to finish. I just think it's nice to allow me to finish since I'm a guest on your show.
It is, but I want you to.
But you had them throwing bombs,
I want you to keep the focus on the insurrection and not on
Molotov
BLM.
cocktails in the very same summer that you're talking about the insurrection. Molotov cocktails were thrown into police cruisers
Candace,
during the BLM George Floyd riots.
But
you didn't seem to have the same
we can talk about the
sensitivity towards police officers.
We're not talking about BLM. Can we?
But it's relevant because it was happening in the exact same city.
Okay.
And so suddenly, like I said, I'm just dizzy because I can't figure out whether or not you care about police officers or you don't care about them, because now you're sharing emotional stories and now you're cutting me off when I want to share one about a Molotov cocktail that was thrown into a police cruiser in New York by some college graduates, and the media, the platform that you were on, cheered it on because this was about justice. But suddenly when it's patriots, you want to talk about the sad stories of the police officers. You're now saying that because you don't comply, you can get shot. That's fine if that's your perspective. And Ashley Bobbitt wasn't complying, but then we should probably revisit the George Floyd riots.
Many Americans can be deemed as patriots in this country, even
okay. Well, I don't know why you're cutting me off. I haven't cut you off. I'm just trying to get out my point.
I'm trying to tell you because we have very limited time, and the reason I'm cutting you off is because I want you to stick to the subject, because you're deflecting and you're talking about
I'm
BLM.
not deflecting. I'm not deflecting.
Please, let me make a point across. And BLM has nothing to do with the insurrection. We're talking about the events that happened in Washington. And
I just want to know what the definition of an insurrection is, because when I was living in D.C. and the BLM was pulling down statues, they were marching on Washington, the media was fine with it. So
Whoa, stop right there. Did you hear that comparison? Candace just raised a brutal question about how narratives shift depending on who's in the headlines. Is it hypocrisy or just politics as usual? Let's connect the dots.
It's confusing because the Brett Kavanaugh hearings and the women were storming into the Capitol. They were lining in the hallways.
I'm dizzy now because I'm
really confused about when it's an insurrection and when it's not an insurrection, because the Brett Kavanaugh hearings definitely looked like the definition of an insurrection when they were chasing down senators in hallways trying to stop them from voting. But for some reason, the media supported that because #MeToo. Again, I'm just trying to get a consistent definition of when it's okay to storm the Capitol building and when it's not okay to storm the Capitol building because it's an insurrection.
But Candace, we're not talking about BLM. And we're not.
That's the problem. We're never talking about anything Democrats do.
I want to get back on the subject because this is not helping anyone. This conversation is not helping anyone. So let's get back on the subject. BLM and what happened has nothing to do, and we can litigate that and we can talk about that. This is not a conversation about BLM. This is a conversation about what happened on January 26th, and this is it's not about Brett Kavanaugh. Okay.
Well, they stopped a vote, so I just think that might be relevant to your insurrection.
Okay. So, do you believe the election was stolen? Because on July 21, you tweeted. This is July of 2021. You tweeted, "Quote: It has now been proven beyond a shadow of a doubt that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris cheated in the 2020 election." Do you still believe the election was stolen? Because even Trump's own Justice Department, the Supreme Court, courts all over the land said that there was actually no evidence to substantiate a stolen election in 2020. It was the
yes, I believe the election was stolen in 2020.
History. You do believe that?
Yes.
Okay. Why do you believe that?
Because it's pretty obvious that COVID was used as a mechanism to fundamentally change the way that people vote. They were passing through absurd legislation, essentially saying that every single person would get a mail-in ballot, even if they hadn't requested one. And then there was actually footage of people dropping off multiple mail-in ballots when the counting stopped in the middle of the night. So yes, I believe that our election was stolen. We don't have to wax poetic about it. We're not going to agree on this issue. You're going to give the talking points that. No,
I'm not going to give talking points. That's what I wanted to. I just want to get.
Yes, I still believe that.
Okay, great. Thank you for answering that. And that is where I want to keep this on the subject and not deflect to something else. And so, I don't work for CNN anymore. So, I don't associate me with that because I don't work for CNN anymore. One of the reasons that I brought up that tweet to discuss, 2020 election and beyond is because, do you think it's fair to say, I think that you've had a political evolution over the last couple of years. Do you think it's fair to say, I think that you've become much more conservative in your thinking and in your stance and things that you say. Do you think it's fair to say that you've become more outspoken and more conservative on issues over the last couple of years?
I think I've thought more and about what it actually means to be a conservative. And I would say that I've probably become infinitely more committed to my Christian faith. And so that might read as more conservative over the years. I think that's fair.
You've been more committed to your Christian faith. How does that play into your
Yeah.
thoughts about
So
politics?
when we think about conservatism, we think about tradition, it's traditionalism. And when I'm thinking about which traditions I want to uphold, it's the Catholic faith, it's Christianity. And I think I've now been in politics for 8, 9 years. When I started, I was young, I was single, I, was running around wearing a MAGA hat. And now I'm a married mother of 3. And a lot of the conversations that we are having are heavier. We're talking about the future of this country that my children are going to have to live in. When we talk about any of these ideologies, we're talking about what they're learning in school today versus what you and I were learning when we were in school. And that has been a radical transformation. So it means more to me. And I think a lot of people, when I was pregnant with my first child, said, motherhood will change you, like it will soften you. And I actually found that politically, motherhood actually hardened me,
How so?
because I realized that these conversations matter. These are not just talking points. This is not somebody talking in a news hit. This is going to have real world implications for my children.
Listen,
And giving you one example of that would be the dawn of the trans indoctrination that you and I did not go through in school. That to me is a very severe thing. I think it's demonic, quite literally demonic, as in, worshiping Baphomet. It goes back a long time. And I'm going to use my
You said
platform to speak
worshiping
about
what? I couldn't hear you. Sorry.
Baphomet.
Okay, got it. Well, here's the thing. I don't know about, I'm not sure I would call it an indoctrination. I do believe that it's legitimate to say that you have questions about it because it's a lot to take in. I wouldn't necessarily call it an indoctrination. And when I grew up, there were definitely trans people. And maybe there wasn't an awareness of it in the world or the country at large. But I remember trans people growing up. I remember people who were cross-dressers growing up. My girlfriend's brother was a transvestite growing up. So there were definitely people who were out there who were part of the trans community. And I remember the threats that Chris got from my girlfriend's brother. I remember people on the street throwing things at him and threatening him. So I'm not sure it's an indoctrination. I think it's just maybe an awareness of things that happen in society. And that doesn't mean that the pendulum doesn't swing too far sometimes, but I'm not sure I would call it an indoctrination. That's all I have to say about that.
Well, when I was in school, I learned that it was a mental disorder. I know that's changed, but it was in the DSM-5 as a mental disorder. And I accept that there are mental disorders, and people that are suffering from mental disorders should never be treated by people harassing them or people yelling at them or calling them names. So I'm sorry that someone that you knew went through that. But when people had mental disorders, it wasn't at least it wasn't commonplace to try to teach them about and normalize the mental disorders in classrooms, because children are experimenting with ideas and children always want to be different. Yeah. And if you say to kids, obviously propaganda works. If you tell kids smoke cigarettes, they all start smoking cigarettes. We've learned this. And then in my generation, we stomped out smoking cigarettes because of the reverse course on that and saying no, actually cancer kills. Well, they taught us in the classroom that cancer kills. And now the majority of people who were smoking like crazy in the 80s are not smoking anymore. So we know that psychological conditioning works, and that the majority of these 12-year-olds, 11-year-olds, 10-year-olds are not non-binary. They're just learning that as a way to be different, they can experiment with these things. And unfortunately, these have very evil results, because kids are being put on drugs that are quite literally used on pedophiles.
Well,
in prison.
That's not necessarily so. But listen, let me just say that about
is a drug. I think
there are a lot of things
on pedophiles in prison. That's what's being given to children.
There's a lot to respond to that as far as the indoctrination. If it was an indoctrination, then I went to a Catholic school, so then I would be, a straight male married to a woman who attends church every single day. If there was any sort of indoctrination that was happening, so apparently the indoctrination at the Catholic school did not work on me, because I ended up being the exact opposite of what they wanted. The other thing is that the whole idea that they're giving young children drugs at an age, and the children are getting to decide at an age that they need these medical drugs for transitioning, that is absolutely not true. And
What do you mean that's not true?
it's
You
not
can
true.
get
And also, um,
you can get puberty blockers as a child. I had a whole person on my show
but
who I
that's
spoke
also
to
with
that
the consent of
transitioned.
the family, and the family, you can get puberty blockers as a child, but the
Yes.
parents have to decide that. That's not
Yes, so
some
they can get
child
puberty blockers.
who's decided. The parent and the child gets to decide that. So
Okay, but that they should puberty
that's a
blockers
whole nother thing. And then
fundamentally
you're
alter
saying it's
them
a
for
mental
life.
disorder. You understand that it has not been, it's been deemed not to be a mental disorder. And then you're saying that it, that you're in your rhetoric, you're saying that it's a mental disorder.
It is a mental
It's not
disorder.
a
That's what I
mental
learned in
disorder.
school.
It's not
It
a
is a
mental
mental
disorder.
disorder.
Okay,
If you
so
think that you're a boy and you're actually a girl, you are suffering from a mental disorder, obviously, because you can't actually change your sex, obviously.
I
You
know
can
plenty
get
of
you can
children
get
now.
you can play dress up, but you can't
I know
change your
plenty of
sex.
young people and old people who
Mhm.
are trans, right? And they are not pretending, and it is not a mental disorder.
Well, it is
They
pretending because
know,
you will literally never be
and
able,
they
if you are a
know,
little boy, to grow up and have a
and
baby
their
because
parents know.
you're
And
not a little
I would
girl.
This is where the debate hits a nerve. Owens dives into trans ideologies and societal norms while Lemon pushes back. It's a clash of values that leaves no one neutral. Let's unpack the layers here.
hope that your child
So
would not grow up, or your children would not grow up, and then thinking that they're trans, and then their parents telling them the exact opposite.
I would
That would
tell
not
them that they have a mental disorder
Yeah.
and we're gonna get them help.
So here's the bottom line. Owens and Lemon didn't just debate, they exposed fundamental divides in how we view freedom, identity, and truth. This is bigger than politics. It's about the future of our culture. Drop your thoughts in the comments, hit that subscribe button, and let's keep uncovering the truth together.